Welcome to the Wheeler Institute's COVID-19 series. Today we have the absolute delight of welcoming Professor Jagdish Sheth, Charles H. Kellstadt Professor at Emory University at the Business School there. Jag, as many of you may know, is one of the world's leading experts on consumer behavior and marketing strategy, among other topics. Not only has Jag published an innumerable number of seemingly of books. In fact, I see Jag as you sit there, that very impressive array of books there that all have your name on them. Not only has he published a great deal, he's also an advisor and confidant to CEOs, heads of state, and many others. Just recently, a few months ago, the government of India and Prime Minister of India bestowed the Padma Bhushan Award, which is one of the most prestigious, highest civilian awards given by the government of India to any individuals. Jag, welcome to our group, to our conversation. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Jag, I was particularly keen on hearing your perspective, partly because I know of your longstanding interest in and expertise on developing countries, emerging markets, and your exhortation over the years, and something that's particularly relevant to the time we live in now, that companies should get much more involved in solving challenges that society faces. And now, as we encounter this, the COVID crisis, you have an article. We'll include a link to the article that is titled, "What Can Business Do to Combat the Coronavirus?" And one of the things you say there is that the business of business is more than business.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by that, and why? Why is the business of business more than business?
First of all, business of business is more than business was always there till the 70s. The obsession about the shareholder value creation happened when we had the first energy crisis, which was a major economic crisis in the world. And many of the conglomerates began to collapse because the stock market collapsed. Debt to equity ratio went up. Private equity began to make a play to break them up and create value. People like Milton Friedman began to advocate that the only purpose of business is to make money for the shareholders, which became very myopic focus. We went through that cycle all through the 80s, and you know private equity companies like KKR, hostile takeover, or Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, investing in companies for long term, no matter what it is. I think the traditional focus on stakeholders, which always has been the case, began to lose its interest. Let me tell you a couple of things. If you go back to the industrialization of the Western economies, starting with England with Industrial Revolution, Germany, and then ultimately in America, most manufacturing was in small towns. In the founding of a family had the capital, had the know-how probably, and they invested in that community, and the community invested in them. They're like the two peas in a pod, actually. And you lived in that community yourself as a family. Every Sunday, church was a great equalizer. No matter what, there is somebody above you called God, whatever faith you belong to. Your employees were your neighbors, primarily, especially managerial class. You were a factory town. In other words, you supported everybody in the town. You built schools. If you look at even today, in England would be Coventry, for example, at one time, Birmingham at one time, Newcastle. Europe is full of that. Germany especially has so many small towns. And even today, the economy is basically run by medium to small family-owned businesses. That was true in America. If you look at all of the original companies, and it really struck me when I was advising Whirlpool Corporation in Benton Harbor, Michigan. Upton family lived there. The CEO knew everybody, and they were a large multinational enterprise by that time. I think what happened was that in search of capital, either the family members or some of the members began to change the headquarters to capital markets like London or New York, for example, or Tokyo. It's the same phenomenon. And so they began to forget other stakeholders. Only stakeholder visible that you were interacting was primarily, in fact, the analysts, for example, opinion makers, and capital market people. You're surrounded by them, you have access. So here is a great company called General Electric. Connectivity, very small town. IBM, Armonk, very small town. When you live and breathe in the community, you are conscious of all your stakeholders, especially suppliers, because you brought the suppliers there. If you're a large assembler, this was very true. And I think it got corrupted. I'm intentionally using the word corrupted when the headquarters were moved to capital markets. Forgot the town and the roots in which they belonged, primarily. I think it is now a reckoning time. That approach has run out its course. It's only about 30, 35 years old, and basically, let's say 50 maximum. People have to go back to that original concept. The purpose of a business is more than just business. You are making money by serving the society in a broader sense, not the local community. And the reason is very simple. Community invested in that company. They gave access to the public works. They built roads for them sometimes, railroads, for example, waterways. They were allowed them to pollute the environment if you wanted to, for that matter. And so because it was symbiotic, what was good for you is good for me, what is good for me is good for you, interdependence, essentially. And contrary to all the economic theories that we have about transaction cost economics that we teach, it was not the internal cost or external cost, but the cost reduction that came in altogether, eliminating of the cost by having relationships. Deep relationships, which means your transactions over time have no incremental cost.
Sorry, please go ahead. Sorry, thanks, Raj.
So my view is that I think we're going to come back, and you just saw last, I think August 2019, the CEO Council publicly announced that we will embrace, we will have to embrace the triple bottom line or the new millennium goals of United Nations.
Two questions on that. Thank you for that. The history lesson, much needed in these moments where it appears that it's always been that way. Actually, what the period we're living through, your point is actually an aberration relative to the way it's always been. And so we don't have to take this for granted. Two questions though, Jag. One about scale, which is another topic that you address in your article, and the other about emerging markets. Let me hold on to the question about emerging markets in a sec. But the argument some have made is that by moving to, let's say, a city like London, companies have access to capital that allows them to tap resources, like human resources, good people, good skills, and look globally, which improves scale, that allows them to grow and therefore provide jobs to thousands of people. Do you see a way, or is that a reasonable argument, or do you see a way of ensuring scale while at the same time retaining those community values?
The best capital is where the capital wants to come to you rather than you going in search of capital. The power changes dramatically. So my view is that the families that were privately held and never needed outside capital. And some of the best stakeholder companies are all family-owned businesses. Or they have a control, at least, managerial control, if not, so capitalists don't control that thing. So that's really one key factor. I don't think you have to move to the capital cities to have access to capital. And we have wonderful examples in the United States, which I know better than any other place. So for example, some of the best companies in the United States are based in St. Paul, Minneapolis.
I used to live in Minnesota. Yes.
Yeah, you know, exactly, I forgot. And then they're Seattle. Some of them are based in Cincinnati. If you go back to that one, and you find fascinating that most of the companies that are not located in the large capital market as headquarters still have that same stakeholder approach where community is of importance to us, we respect the community, and there's something above all of us. The church is a great equalizer in the community. You have to participate in the community no matter what. If somebody's funeral home or memorial services as a family who founded the city or the town, basically a factory town, you have to participate. So it makes you conscious about your role in.
Yeah, and as they say, if you unfairly lay off a whole lot of people to pocket the money yourself, you still might have to face those same people in church or in the grocery store, and that's a disciplining mechanism.
And yeah, then just to elaborate on that one, Rajesh, this is the beauty of being on campus towns. To live in a campus town, there is no hierarchy. You may have an official hierarchy of a president, a provost, and all of the deans, directors. But if they're your neighbors, you have a relationship which is more holistic than strictly hierarchical.
So, and somehow more human than just purely commercial, right? Exactly. To the point about developing countries, Jack. Actually, I remember reading an article somewhere, I think this may still be true, that the only city in India, apparently, where you could drink water from the tap, where it's safe to drink water from the tap, is Jamshedpur, which is the place where the Tata Steel Company is located. And the Tata Company, of course, although we've talked about the Tatas, many times, it is an exemplar, and their entire philosophy is around the communities they serve rather than shareholders or anything else. Very consistent with your logic. Can you tell us, can you elaborate a bit more about this, the idea of the business of business being more than business? In developing countries where the business of government might become the business of business as well, where there are many infrastructural challenges, both physical infrastructure as well as institutional infrastructure that may be a work in progress, shall we say. How does this, what differences, if any, or what emphases would you point to in emerging markets?
Especially in emerging markets, several well-known multinationals have really learned how to do business there or how to get demand going. There's a latent demand. Consumption is always there. So if you take even today, below the poverty level people defined by United Nations, for example, or IMF, $2 per day income, it's a $5 trillion economy. But it is all surprisingly what I would call informal economy, unorganized, and there are people who serve that market primarily. What the multinationals learn is to organize that, offer them better quality products through their own product qualities, obviously, reach out way deep into the jungles of Amazon, for example. So Avon in cosmetics has 1 million agents in Brazil alone, and similarly in other countries which are underdeveloped, essentially. This is true, in fact, of many of the companies like Hindustan Lever at one time. I remember researching on in 1968 in India for population control, how to reach the contraceptives into the most rural markets. And we found 4 multinationals had more reach than anybody. Coca-Cola was one of them at that time. ITC Cigarettes, which is the old Imperial Tobacco Company, which was nationalized in many ways, they had the reach, for example. Brook Bond Tea, they had 650,000 agents out in rural. People walked as agents 5-6 kilometers to deliver the tea leaves or boxed or bicycle, whatever it is. To me, businesses are excellent at making things. They know how to reach and they know how to market. There are no skill set like that ever exists in the governments. Government may have the size, but they don't know how to scale up. So in a crisis like this, business can step it more than the government or more than the military for that matter. If you combine all of the multinationals and their talent and their reach and distribution systems, factories, whatever you do it, if they divert that, as we did during World War II for war purposes, both in England as well as in America, or whoever was fighting at that time, I think this we have to take it very seriously. It is not making money. Governments can mandate you anyhow eventually. Ultimately, it's not self-interest when government mandates to say thou shalt do it, because that looks like intrusive. Self-enlightened companies say, I can chip in myself now and benefits will come later on.
Yeah.
And
And
even
yet at the same time, sorry, please.
even at the sacrifice of the shareholder in the short run.
Well, that's what I was getting to. At the same time, you're pretty critical of the fact that despite having these capabilities at their disposal, many businesses, or at least big businesses, have failed to do, at least in this particular crisis, what they could be doing. And is it, again, back to the point you were making about the shareholder primacy? Or is there more to it than that?
I think it's slightly more than that. If the family still has a significant ownership in the business, they still live in that small town, they will probably not be as influenced by the quarterly performance guidance and all the stuff that we hear right now. They would ignore it. In India, I've seen that clearly with Wipro Limited. Azim Premji still owns significant shares, and he does not look at what happens quarter by quarter, analyst recommendations, criticism, comment, etc. He has that strength to say, I have a business to serve the society. Ratan Tata the same way we have seen in India, and Tatas have always done that historically, and the legacy continues. So in many ways, it has to be in the DNA of the company. It is not easy to then say, all right, I will do all this money making on the one side, and then I will do the CSR. That, to me, that's not your DNA. That's just like giving money out of guilt or whatever it is, giving money out of pressure, To me, it has to be part of your culture.
Yeah, or because CSR is mandated as in some countries. Yeah, exactly. And 2 points on that, Jack. I was at an event with Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, when he was brand new to Unilever, and it was an event with some of the world's top CEOs of investment companies, mutual funds, and large institutional investors, among others. And he said, Unilever is going to focus on the long term. So if you care obsessively about our results in the next quarter, we're the wrong company for you. We shouldn't be investing in us. If, on the other hand, you believe, like we do, that by solving some of the biggest problems that the world faces, we can actually get commercial success, then we hope you will be with us. And our belief is, and this was the second point, that big problems imply big needs, which imply big opportunities for us. And if you believe in that, if for the long run, we hope you will invest in us. And that was a very explicit statement he made. But I've spoken to him, and he says, and I said, how many others do this? Sadly, the answer is always the Unilevers and the Tatas and a few others. What is stopping people? Why is stopping more businesses from doing this? Yes.
Very simple. The investment came from more and more institutional investment. If you go back to the history of Coca-Cola, it was in a small town called Rome, Georgia. Every person in that town invested in the shares of the company. To keep the shares all their life, and when they die, it'll go to their succession, children, whatever. Shares were never traded. Institutional investors have no loyalty. They're only for themselves.
So the marketer, I've made this point before, the marketer in me says you should segment investors.
Absolutely. And we shape customer expectations. We should shape investor expectations. So investor relationship is done in a very different way. My view is that you should not go with a view that investor is more important than the company. You have to be very selective about the investors who will be for the long haul. In some sense, Warren Buffett has done that. He has stayed with the companies despite all the tough problems because he believes in the future of the company, and in many ways has been a more nurturing environment. Private equity is a very key player. All this decade, like in the 80s, private equities will rule the world, not the public equity, which is stock market, or the debt market even, private capital as it is called. And private capital has to become more and more benevolent. It is not here to strip off the company, take the money, do mergers of equals, for example, then break them up, all the stuff, which is strictly creating asset value for the investors of the private equity. So I think private equity chairmen of the companies have to become a lot more enlightened. If they become enlightened capital, as it is happening, if you talk to BlackRock, for example, or Blackstone, they're now saying that we will only invest in companies that comply with ESG, environment, social, and governance, for example. Now, how much they actually do it would be a very key factor. But to me, I think the message is in the right direction. This is I must tell you, this is a reckoning of the corporate America or corporate Inc. in general, because if you don't do it, populism movement that came on politicians because they became useless to the society as a politicians. Next institution under attack will be the business institutions. And when the masses revolt against business institutions, it can't survive, period.
We could talk, and the whole area of impact investment that seems to be at least getting a lot of visibility, as you said, ESG and so on. How that plays out would be an interesting thing. And I realize we're running out of time, so I have one question that I'd like to ask, and switching focus from the investor to the customer. And specifically low-income consumers in emerging markets. You know, as you said, most of those living in emerging markets are entrepreneurs. At least they run their own business. They're self-employed. They're in the informal sector, and many of them are suffering right now. If we look at them as consumers, their situation is increasingly dire. Big businesses say we have problems of our own at the moment.
Yes.
What is the business case for doing something for these low-income consumers at a moment like this?
There are 3-4 things one can do. One would be to increase their livelihood. So don't look upon the consumption where they will spend money on you, but how do you generate economic viability? And there are all kinds of hundreds and hundreds of experiments going on all over the world, in Central America, Latin America, India, Africa. It's exciting to see how much that partnering relationship is happening. So to me, and especially, of course, Muhammad Yunus's own experience in Bangladesh, for example, where women, you invest in the buffalo of the person, you lend money for buying the buffalo, it becomes a livelihood and you can migrate, right? I think it's very viable, first of all. We have not thought about that one because we don't see the low-income consumer as more than just consumer primarily. Second thing is very easy, as I just mentioned, the total market size worldwide, and it's highly concentrated in Africa and South Asia primarily. Like 60-70% of the low-income people are in those two subcontinent and subcontinent. It's very possible to organize that. From unbranded consumption of $5 trillion, that's a huge market. If you know how to crack the market properly, which is where you can have low-cost innovations you can come out with, for example. You can have distribution systems different than the traditional distribution systems. It's very possible. So in other words, there is a business case.
And in a situation like this, though, where they don't have much money at the moment, the distribution systems can't work because they're not allowed to work at the moment in some cases. What can companies or managers or indeed graduates of MBA programs, among others, what can they do when it seems like the need is great, yes, but the capacity that those trillions of dollars are not easily, available at this moment to those consumers, among others, and those distribution channels that may have been decades in the making are not, at least temporarily, viable. I'm thinking, therefore, digital and other ways of addressing. Can you tell us any sort of reflections on this particular moment of COVID and the immense challenges that these communities, back to your question, back to your point, are facing?
No, thank you for reminding me about the online commerce, especially in emerging markets where everybody has a cell phone, a feature phone, and quite a few are now having smartphones. So I can do transactions quite a lot. And Flipkart in India, for example, Alibaba in China, for example, Amazon around here have clearly proven they have the reach deep down into the rural populations or this disadvantaged or low-income consumers. They are reachable, in other words, through other devices, through online transactions, but then delivery being done. So to me, it's a great suggestion that one can provide access to the product and even affordability, hopefully, to the product in that mechanism. So what you do brick and mortar, you can do. But there are two additional concepts I will drop. This is the time to think about servant leadership. You really think more from that viewpoint. And the other thing is learn from the gangs.
Wait, wow, this is pretty profound stuff. So could you go back, please? Rewind a bit. Can you tell us more about I'm sensitive to time, but that one needs some elaboration, please. Servant leadership.
Servant leadership primarily says, just like many faith-based organizations say, I have a mission to accomplish above and beyond my livelihood, my survival. So you have a mission, basically. Christianity has a fundamental mission objective, as it is in many faiths. The gang is the most important part. Here are two rival gangs living off those poor people in Cape Town, South Africa. For COVID reasons, market is not accessible. People have no money, they're surviving. So the two competing gangs got together, serving the poor. We can learn from the gangs. If they can cooperate, business can cooperate. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
It's such a mindset. My view is that we have to sort of deorient ourselves from the shareholder obsession. And we have a book out, as you know, now 2007, Forms of Endearment, which actually showed that companies that are stakeholder oriented, employee orientation, supplier orientation, community orientation, and customer orientation outperformed in the market for 15 years, 40% annual return of 19 companies that are listed companies, compared to Good to Great book, which is Jim Collins' best-selling, but it was a shareholder value-driven companies primarily, only about 21% through the cycles of business cycles or stock market cycles, and the S&P was only 9%. By the way, more damning result, out of the Jim Collins 11 companies, 2 have already gone into Chapter 11 protection.
Yeah.
Of the 19 companies that were chosen by us, and there are more, 30 companies, but most of them are not listed even, so we could not do any research. Out of the 19 companies, not a single one has declared Chapter 11 protection, despite 2008, 2009 economic crisis, for example, or what is happening right now. So, in other words, I think somebody, I don't know who, whether those are economists, planted the idea that business is a win-loss situation. Business also is a positive sum, not a zero-sum game. And we need to think about how do we make it win-win situation among all of the stakeholders, pretty much.
Yeah. And so we'll make sure we have links to the books you've mentioned on the site, so people can refer to them. Your point about the South African gangs also reinforces, in my mind, the fact that a lot of competition authorities these days have been busy trying to figure out what will competition look like as these antitrust authorities are wondering what will this look like once we come out of COVID, and are increasingly open to let's not call it collusion, cooperation of the kind that you described, especially when it is to address these extraordinary circumstances that we live in. Jack, we could clearly talk for a long time, and hopefully we'll come back to these themes. But thank you so very much for joining us in this very extraordinary and unusual moment. And thank you for making yourself available at very short notice. It's been a delight as always to catch up. Just a few weeks ago, you and I were talking about
Yes.
doing faculty seminars in India. All that seems like a fantasy now. But hopefully we will be back to normality soon. And in the meantime, thank you for inspiring us, and please stay safe.
Thank you for inviting me again. Thanks, Rajesh.
Absolutely. Pleasure.